For more on the outcome of the Geneva II talks, I spoke with Ash Jain earlier today. He's a former member of the Secretary of State's policy planning staff and an analyst with the German Marshall Fund. I began by asking him if any breakthrough will likely come out of the peace talks.
I think the fundamental issue in this crisis from day one has been the future of the Bashar al-Assad regime. The opposition has been quite clear that its fundamental demand is that the Assad regime, this dictatorship that has ruled Syria for more than 4 decades, needs to go. And they haven't stepped away from that demand. On the other side, the government of Assad has been equally firm in its stance that it's going nowhere. And as long as the dynamic holds, I think we're unlikely to see any real change in the situation on the ground. This war will continue on until one side or the other simply finds that it's unable to sustain the military strength that it needs to change the positions on the ground.
On Friday, the talks looked bleak, but it does look like there have been some signs of progress. They are talking about sending in some humanitarian aid now.
Right, and I think the prospect for these talks to produce any kind of real breakthrough are very slim. Instead, where you might see some progress is on the question of humanitarian assistance, which would be welcome news for those who are suffering, the thousands and tens of thousands of people who need access to food and water. Any kind of pause in the fighting that would allow that kind of aid and assistance to get through would be a good outcome. I don't think that will change anything, however, with regard to the conflict itself, where these talks are simply, I think the two sides are simply too far apart to expect any kind of real outcome on that front.
We're talking about 30 to 40% of that country has left. They've had to leave. How many people can you reasonably expect to continue this fight on the ground with the rebels? Right.
You've seen huge displacement of the Syrian population since this crisis began. Refugees, as you said, flowing out of the country into the adjacent neighbors of Syria. Nevertheless, the rebel forces have been able to maintain support within their own ranks to keep the fight going. I don't see any a prospect for that to change. The rebels are committed to this fight. Huge numbers of the Syrian people are eager to see the Assad regime go. And on the other side, I think the regime has been able to maintain its own ranks and keep the army and keep the military behind the regime.
We can only hope for the best coming out of these talks. Ash Jain, thank you for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.